The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Prescott's dusty main street as Anna Mitchell adjusted her widow's black dress, watching warily as three riders approached from the east. 2 years after Appomattox, the war's tendrils still reached across the frontier, drawing desperate men westward like vultures to carrion. Her husband Benjamin's last letter, delivered 6 months after his death at Cold Harbor, had brought more trouble than comfort. The riders dismounted outside the Prescott Hotel, trail dust coating their clothes and exhaustion evident in their movements. The leader, a tall man with a silver badge glinting on his vest, scanned the street before his gaze settled on Anna's dry goods store. She recognized the look. Another federal agent hunting the phantom Confederate gold that had vanished in the war's chaotic final days. Inside her store, Anna ran her fingers over the cryptic map Benjamin had enclosed in his letter, the parchment worn thin from countless readings. The crude drawings meant nothing to most eyes, but she knew they led to over $2 million in Confederate gold. Wealth that could rebuild shattered lives or spark new bloodshed. Benjamin had meant it as insurance for her future, not knowing his noble intentions would put her at the center of a gathering storm. Frances Turner burst through the door, her normally pristine dress disheveled. "Anna, there's trouble coming. Alexander Perez and his revolutionaries crossed the border last night. Word is they're headed this way." The schoolteacher's face was flushed with equal parts excitement and fear. The Mexican revolutionary leader had been raiding border towns, claiming to fight for the people while lining his own pockets. "How many?" Anna asked, already calculating how much ammunition she had stored in the root cellar. The town's defense had fallen to her after Sheriff Roberts took a bullet 3 months back. Now she coordinated a loose network of widows and aging veterans, determined to protect their home from the circling predators who saw the remote settlement as easy prey. Frances glanced nervously at the window. At least 30 men, but that's not all. Clara Phillips saw Noah Turner's gang camped in Devil's Canyon. Those Confederate diehards have been pushing north, leaving burning towns in their wake. She twisted her hands in her skirt. "We're caught between three groups now, each thinking we know something about that cursed gold." Anna's mind raced through their options. The federal agents would demand answers she couldn't give. Perez's revolutionaries would show no mercy in their search, and Turner's unreconstructed rebels still fought a war 2 years dead. Yet she couldn't abandon Prescott. The town had become a refuge for too many who had nowhere else to go. Helen Roberts, the sheriff's widow, appeared in the doorway with her Spencer carbine cradled in capable hands. "I've got the women organizing supplies in the church basement. Jacob Phillips is teaching anyone who can hold a rifle how to shoot straight." Her voice held the steady calm that had helped them survive past crises. "But Anna, we need to know. Is it true what they're hunting?" Anna met her friend's eyes, weighing the cost of truth against the price of silence. The gold's location had died with Benjamin, his map a cruel riddle she'd never solved. But admitting that would only make the circling wolves more desperate. "Get everyone inside the defensive positions we planned. I'll handle the federal agent. Maybe we can turn these three groups against each other instead of us." The afternoon wore on as Anna watched the federal agent, who had introduced himself as Ethan Mitchell, no relation, though the shared surname raised eyebrows, interview townspeople. His questions circled closer to her store with each passing hour. Beyond the town's boundaries, dust clouds marked the approach of multiple riding groups. Time was running out, and she needed a plan that would save more than just the gold's secret. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Prescott's main street as Anna watched another dust cloud rise on the horizon. This one approached from the south, likely the Mexican revolutionaries she'd heard whispers about. Her fingers traced the worn brass key hanging from her neck, its weight a constant reminder of what Benjamin had entrusted to her before riding off to his death. The key wasn't to the gold itself, but to something else. Something that made the riddle of the map's location even more complex. Helen appeared at her side, rifle held casually but ready. Frances spotted riders coming in from the east too. "They're flying Confederate colors. What's left of them anyway?" She paused, studying Anna's face. "You know Alexander's leading them, don't you? He won't stop until he gets what he thinks Benjamin promised the cause." Anna's throat tightened at the mention of Alexander. Benjamin's former commander had visited 3 times since the war ended, each encounter more threatening than the last. He can threaten all he wants. The gold belongs to the people who suffered for it. She straightened her spine, Years of running the town's only mercantile having taught her how to project authority she didn't always feel. Inside the store, Clara was helping organize supplies for what might become a siege. The young woman had a talent for logistics that reminded Anna painfully of Benjamin. "We've got enough ammunition for 3 days of fighting," Clara reported. "But water could be a problem if they cut us off from the creek." Agent Mitchell chose that moment to finally approach the store, his federal marshal's badge catching the sunlight. He moved with the careful precision of a man accustomed to violence, though his manner remained courteous. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, acknowledging their coincidental shared name, "I believe it's time we had that conversation about your late husband's activities during the war's final months." Anna met his gaze steadily, noting the intelligence in his eyes. He wasn't like the other federal agents who'd come through. This one had pieces of the puzzle she hadn't expected. "My store is rather busy at the moment, Marshal. Perhaps we could speak later." She gestured to the growing crowd of townspeople seeking supplies and shelter. "I'm afraid time is a luxury we don't have," Mitchell replied, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "There's a telegram from Globe warning that Noah Garcia and his revolutionaries have already burned 2 settlements looking for the cache. They believe your husband's map leads to more than just Confederate gold." The implications of his words sent a chill through Anna. Benjamin had hinted at something similar in his final letter, rambling about documents and ledgers that could tear open old wounds. She'd dismissed it as fever-induced delirium at the time, but now, Frances burst through the door, her normally composed features tight with worry. "Riders from Yuma just came in. They say Jacob Turner's gang is headed this way too. They're flying no colors at all." The news drew curses from Helen. Jacob Turner was a former Confederate scout turned bandit, known for playing all sides against each other. Anna's mind raced, calculating angles and possibilities. The town had maybe 2 hours before the first groups arrived, and their defenses weren't ready for a 4-way fight. She needed to understand what each faction wanted, truly wanted, beyond the obvious lure of gold. Mitchell knew something about documents. Alexander was driven by a cause that had already died, and the revolutionaries sought leverage for their own war across the border. "Marshal," she said finally, "I'll tell you what I know, but first, what do those telegrams from Globe really say about what's hidden with that gold?" She saw the subtle shift in his expression and knew she'd struck a nerve. Whatever Benjamin had hidden away, it was worth far more than its weight in Confederate dollars. The marshal glanced at the gathering crowds, then back to Anna. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in your office, Mrs. Mitchell. There are aspects of this situation that shouldn't be overheard." His hand rested casually near his holster. Not a threat, but a reminder that he was prepared for whatever came next. Anna led the marshal through the dusty street toward her small office, housed in what had once been Benjamin's surveyor's practice. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings, and she noted how the various factions had already staked out their territories across town. The federal men clustered near the telegraph office, Alexander's remnant Confederates at the Saloon, and the Mexicans keeping to the livery stables on the outskirts. Inside the office, she pulled the heavy curtains closed before lighting a lamp. Maps of the Arizona Territory lined the walls, Benjamin's careful annotations still visible in faded ink. The marshal removed his hat, revealing streaks of gray at his temples that aged him considerably. "Mrs. Mitchell, those telegrams mention something that could reignite conflicts we've spent years trying to settle. Your husband didn't just hide Confederate gold. He hid documents that could legitimize land claims across 3 territories." Anna sank into her chair, her mind racing. Benjamin had never mentioned documents, but it explained his frantic behavior in those final days before he rode out. He'd spent hours in this very office, poring over his maps and muttering about property lines. "The revolutionaries," she said slowly, "they're not just after money for weapons. They want proof of Mexican land grants that predate American control." "Precisely. And Alexander's group wants evidence of Confederate property seizures they believe would still be legally binding. The federal government ... He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We need to ensure none of these papers ever see the light of day. Too many people would suffer if old wounds were reopened." Through the window, Anna caught glimpses of movement. People taking positions, watching the office. The town she'd called home for 8 years was becoming a powder keg. "I have part of Benjamin's cipher," she admitted, "but it's not complete. He split it between trusted friends." Clara has another piece, but she left for Prescott 2 days ago. The marshal's expression darkened. The dust-laden wind whistled through the empty streets of Globe as Anna Mitchell stood at her bedroom window, watching 3 riders approach from the south. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the brass key hanging from a leather cord around her neck. The only remnant of her late husband besides bittersweet memories and a cryptic map he'd entrusted to her before heading off to war. The riders' appearance confirmed her fears that Benjamin Turner's warning had been right. They were coming for the gold. Alexander Perez led his small contingent of federal agents into town, his dark eyes scanning the weathered buildings as they passed. 4 years of hunting Confederate holdouts and missing war assets had led them here, to this remote mining settlement nestled in the Arizona Territory's copper-rich hills. Intelligence suggested the widow Mitchell knew something about the vanished Confederate treasury wagons that had disappeared in the war's chaotic final days. Benjamin Turner watched the federal agents from the shadows of the general store's covered porch, his sheriff's badge catching the late afternoon sun. He'd sworn to protect Globe and its residents, but the influx of dangerous men seeking the lost gold threatened to tear the fragile peace apart. His deputy, Jacob Roberts, had already reported Mexican revolutionaries gathering in the hills south of town, led by the notorious Frances Perez, sister to the federal agent who just arrived. The connections ran deeper than anyone suspected. Anna had discovered that Alexander and Frances were searching for more than just Confederate gold. Their father had been the Mexican military officer who'd helped hide it in the first place. The siblings now worked for opposing forces, each believing they had the rightful claim. But only Anna knew the truth her husband had revealed on his deathbed. The treasure's location was just a small part of a much larger conspiracy. In the saloon, Noah Phillips nursed his whiskey while eavesdropping on the federal agent's conversation. As a former Confederate cavalry officer who'd helped guard the gold shipment, he knew they were all chasing shadows. The real secret lay in the coded letters exchanged between General Mitchell and the Mexican conspirators, letters that his widow Anna had discovered hidden in their family Bible. Noah had been tracking them for months, waiting for the right moment to make his move. Helen Turner, the sheriff's wife, brought Anna a pot of fresh coffee and settled in for their daily afternoon visit. The two women had formed a close friendship since Anna arrived in Globe as a war bride 3 years ago. Helen sensed her friend's unease and gently pressed for details, but Anna remained guarded. She couldn't risk revealing that the key she wore wasn't just a sentimental keepsake. It opened a strongbox containing documents that could ignite an international incident. The tension in Globe ratcheted higher as Clara Roberts rode in from her family's ranch on the outskirts of town, bringing word that armed men were gathering in the hills. As Jacob's sister and the local schoolteacher, she was well connected to the town's gossip network. She'd overheard enough to piece together that something big was brewing, and her brother's tight-lipped warnings about staying alert had only confirmed her suspicions. As dusk approached, Alexander Perez made his way to the widow Mitchell's house, rehearsing the cover story about investigating wartime property claims. But Anna was prepared for his arrival, having already hidden the crucial documents beneath the floorboards of her root cellar. She would play the role of the grieving widow while working to unravel the web of betrayal that had led to her husband's death. The truth about the gold was far more complicated than anyone suspected. The first shots rang out just after sunset, echoing through the narrow streets as Frances Perez's revolutionaries launched their attack. Benjamin Turner quickly organized the townspeople into defensive positions, but he knew they were badly outnumbered. Anna Mitchell watched from her window as Globe's residents barricaded their homes and businesses, wondering if she should reveal what she knew before more blood was shed. The key around her neck felt heavier with each passing moment. In the growing chaos, Noah Phillips slipped away from the saloon and made his way toward the widow's house. He knew Anna would be watching for federal agents and revolutionaries, but she wouldn't be expecting a face from her husband's past. As he moved through the shadows, he reflected on the irony that everyone was fighting over gold that had never actually existed. The treasure wagons had been an elaborate ruse to cover the movement of something far more valuable. The pieces were all in motion now, converging on Globe like storm clouds gathering before a tempest. Alexander and Frances Perez, unknowing pawns in their father's decades-old scheme. Benjamin Turner trying to protect his town while keeping his own secrets. And at the center of it all, Anna Mitchell, whose dead husband's legacy was about to change everything. The key she wore would unlock more than just a strongbox. It would open a door to a truth that would shake the very foundations of the post-war peace. Noah approached Anna's house on the outskirts of Globe, where oil lamps cast a warm glow through lace curtains. The modest homestead sat against the backdrop of dark mesas, a lone sentinel in the gathering dusk. He noticed fresh horseshoe prints in the packed earth. Someone else had visited recently. Drawing his revolver, he moved cautiously toward the back door, his cavalry training evident in every silent step. Inside, Anna Mitchell sat at her kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee untouched before her as she studied an old tintype photograph. The key hanging from her neck caught the lamplight, its brass surface scratched and worn from years of handling. She didn't look up when Noah entered, as if she'd been expecting him all along. "You're later than I thought you'd be, Lieutenant Phillips," she said softly. The revelation caught Noah off guard, but he maintained his composure. "Your husband told you about me then." He remained by the door, weapon lowered but ready. Anna finally looked up, her eyes reflecting a mixture of weariness and determination. "James told me everything before he died. About the real cargo, about your role in the deception, about what's really hidden in the old Prescott mine. In town, Benjamin Turner was dealing with his own crisis. Alexander Perez and his sister Frances had taken rooms at the hotel, but their presence had attracted unwanted attention. 3 riders from Yuma had arrived, claiming to be cattle buyers but carrying far too many weapons for such peaceful business. Turner knew they were connected to the Mexican revolutionaries, and he positioned his deputies strategically around Globe's main street. The evening stage from Flagstaff brought another player into the unfolding drama. Helen Turner, Benjamin's estranged wife, stepped down from the coach looking as elegant as the day she'd left for California 2 years ago. Her return now, of all times, couldn't be coincidence. She carried a small leather satchel that she clutched protectively to her chest as she made her way through the dusty street. At the saloon, Alexander Perez watched Helen's arrival with keen interest. He nursed a whiskey while his sister Frances chatted with Clara, the barmaid, trying to gather information about Anna Mitchell. The siblings knew their father's obsession with the Confederate gold had driven him to madness and eventually death. But they'd never understood why he'd focused so intensely on Globe and the widow Mitchell. As night fell over the town, more riders arrived from the south. They made camp just outside Globe's limits, their fires dotting the darkness like earthbound stars. Turner counted at least 15 men, too many for his small force to handle if things turned violent. He sent a rider to Prescott requesting reinforcements, but help would take days to arrive. The storm clouds Noah had sensed were indeed gathering, and the first drops were about to fall. In Anna's kitchen, Noah finally holstered his weapon and took a seat across from the widow. "What James and I transported wasn't gold," he explained, watching her reaction carefully. "It was something the Confederacy valued far more. Documents that could destroy what little peace we've managed to build since Appomattox." Anna's hand unconsciously moved to the key at her neck, and Noah noticed it wasn't brass at all, but gold-painted to look like common metal. Outside, a horse whinnied in the darkness, and both Noah and Anna froze. Someone was watching the house, waiting for their chance to claim what they believed was a fortune in Confederate gold. But only 3 people alive knew the truth, and 2 of them were currently sharing a pot of cooling coffee in a widow's kitchen on the edge of town. The third was Helen Turner, carrying documents in her satchel that would complete the puzzle and reveal why Globe had become the center of a gathering storm. The distant thunder rolled closer as Noah moved to the window, his trained eyes scanning the darkness beyond Anna's property. The horse they'd heard belonged to a rider now visible in brief flashes of lightning, a lone figure at the edge of the mesquite grove. But Noah knew better than to assume they were dealing with just one observer. His years tracking Confederate deserters had taught him that trouble rarely traveled alone. Anna stood beside him, her breath fogging the glass as she whispered, "Helen was supposed to meet me yesterday at the church. When she didn't show, I feared the worst." Her fingers worked the gold-painted key nervously. She said something about a man named Benjamin following her from Prescott, claiming to represent former Confederate interests. Noah's jaw tightened at the mention of Benjamin. The man had been a particularly ruthless quartermaster during the war, one who'd orchestrated the disappearance of not just gold, but evidence of wartime profiteering that could shatter the reputation of several prominent Southern families now trying to rebuild their fortunes in Washington. The rain finally broke, drumming against the tin roof as Anna lit a coal oil lamp. The sun beat mercilessly on the dusty streets of Globe as Anna Mitchell watched from her boarding house window. Three groups of riders approached from different directions, their intentions as clear as the Arizona sky. To the east, Federal Marshal Benjamin Turner led his deputies, their badges glinting. From the south came Alexander Perez and his revolutionaries, their horses carrying extra ammunition. And from the north, the remnants of the Confederate diehards under Jacob Roberts, still wearing their faded gray uniforms. Anna's fingers traced the worn edges of the letter her late husband Ethan had sent her just before Appomattox. Within its cryptic verses lay the only clue to where he'd helped hide the Confederate treasury's last shipment, $2 million in gold coins that never reached Richmond. She knew all three groups would tear Globe apart to find it, and innocent people would die unless she found a way to prevent it. Frances Phillips, the town's schoolteacher, burst through Anna's door without knocking. "They're gathering in the street," she said breathlessly. "Marshal Turner's demanding we hand over any Confederate sympathizers. Perez's men are taking up positions by the livery stable. And Roberts's boys, they're your husband's old unit, aren't they?" Anna nodded grimly. The men who'd served with Ethan now viewed her as a traitor for refusing to reveal the gold's location. In the saloon across the street, Noah Turner, the marshal's younger brother, was meeting secretly with Helen Roberts, Jacob's wife. Their clandestine romance had blossomed despite their families' opposing loyalties, and now they were desperate to prevent bloodshed between their kin. Anna had discovered their meetings weeks ago but kept their secret, knowing she might need allies on both sides. The first shots rang out as the sun reached its zenith. One of Perez's men fired at a federal deputy who'd ventured too close to their position. The deputy fell, and chaos erupted. Anna watched in horror as the three factions began exchanging fire, using Globe's buildings for cover. Civilians fled screaming into their homes and shops as bullets splintered wood and shattered windows. Clara Turner, the marshal's daughter, had been organizing the townswomen into an impromptu nursing corps when the fighting started. Now she directed them in dragging the wounded to safety, showing remarkable courage under fire. Anna admired the girl's strength. It reminded her of herself during the war years. But Clara's presence also complicated matters, as she was betrothed to Alexander Perez's son in a political marriage meant to ease tensions that had clearly failed. As the afternoon wore on, the fighting intensified. Jacob Roberts' men set fire to the general store to smoke out the Federals hiding inside, while Perez's revolutionaries used the chaos to loot several businesses. Anna realized the violence would only escalate unless she took action. The gold's location wasn't worth the destruction of Globe and its people. But simply revealing the truth wouldn't stop the bloodshed. These men all had too much pride and hatred built up over years of war and loss. In her bedroom, Anna retrieved the false bottom from her trunk and removed her husband's actual final letter. Not the decoy she'd shown others. In it, Ethan had explained that the gold was a curse that had driven good men mad with greed. He'd worked with sympathetic Mexicans to secretly return it to its rightful owners, Southern banks and citizens who'd been forced to contribute to the Confederate cause. The treasure the three factions sought had never existed in Globe. Through Frances Phillips, Anna arranged a meeting with Helen Roberts and Clara Turner in the church basement. The three women, representing connections to all sides of the conflict, formed an unlikely alliance. They would use their influence to reveal the truth about the gold, while simultaneously exposing secrets that would force the men to stand down. Helen's affair with Noah, Clara's broken engagement, and evidence of corruption in all three factions. As dusk approached, more buildings burned and the casualty count rose. Anna made her way to the church tower, where Frances helped her ring the bells, the signal for their plan to begin. Helen confronted her husband Jacob in the street, while Clara publicly denounced both her father's and her former fiancé's actions. The fighting gradually quieted as Anna read Ethan's real letter aloud from the church steps, her voice carrying through the smoke-filled streets. The revelation hit the men like a physical blow. Some cursed and raged, others simply slumped in defeat. Marshal Turner was the first to holster his weapon, followed slowly by Jacob Roberts. Alexander Perez held out longest until his own men began laying down their arms, unwilling to die for a non-existent treasure. The spell of gold fever broke, leaving behind the bitter taste of shame and wasted violence. As the sun set over Globe's damaged streets, Anna watched the three groups of riders depart in different directions. Noah and Helen seized their chance to leave together, heading west toward a new life. Clara organized the townspeople to fight the remaining fires, while Frances began documenting the day's events for posterity. The town had survived, though changed forever, and Anna finally felt free of the burden she'd carried since Ethan's death. In the end, it wasn't the gold that had mattered, but the choices people made when faced with its temptation. Anna kept Ethan's real letter close as she helped tend to the wounded, knowing that sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting, but from finding the courage to reveal difficult truths. Globe would rebuild, and perhaps the scars left behind would serve as a reminder that treasure isn't always what it seems. As the dust settled over Globe in the following days, the town's transformation became evident in more than just its scarred buildings. The shared ordeal had forged unlikely bonds between people who might never have connected otherwise. Anna found herself working alongside Clara to establish a proper town council, something Globe had resisted in its wilder days. The widow's quiet strength had earned her a respect that went beyond sympathy for her loss. Frances, true to her nature as a chronicler, began interviewing survivors about their experiences during the confrontation. Her detailed accounts would later become crucial when federal investigators arrived to piece together the complex web of deceptions that had led various factions to converge on Globe. Through her writings, the human cost of gold fever was preserved as a warning to future generations. Word reached Globe that Noah and Helen had made it safely to Prescott, where they'd married quietly and opened a small general store. Their letter to Anna expressed gratitude for her role in helping them escape the violence, though they admitted the temptation of the gold had nearly destroyed their chance at happiness. Anna kept their correspondence alongside Ethan's letter, reminders of how truth could ultimately triumph over greed. The town's recovery efforts revealed unexpected treasures of a different sort. As they cleared debris from the damaged buildings, residents discovered old documents and artifacts that told the story of Globe's earliest days. Clara recognized the historical value and worked with Frances to establish the town's first proper archive, ensuring that the full history, including the recent conflict, would be preserved. Benjamin's former conspirators faced justice in Flagstaff, their testimonies revealing a broader plot that had roots in lingering post-war resentments. The federal agents who had pursued the case expressed amazement at how a small town's residents had managed to outmaneuver 3 separate groups of hardened adversaries. Anna's role in exposing the truth about the non-existent gold became a minor legend among law enforcement circles. Alice, who had lost her home in the fighting, found unexpected support from the community. The townspeople rallied to help rebuild her house, making improvements that transformed it into a gathering place for neighborhood children. She started a small school there, teaching youngsters about the importance of choosing honor over easy riches. The lesson of the gold fever became part of Globe's unofficial curriculum. As autumn approached, Anna finally felt ready to properly sort through Ethan's remaining possessions. Among them, she found journals that revealed his struggle with the moral implications of his wartime actions. His final letter hadn't just spared the town from violence. It had been his way of making peace with the past. Understanding this brought Anna a deeper sense of closure and pride in her late husband's character. The Mexican revolutionaries who had sought the gold were reported to have joined a larger cause along the border, fighting for social justice rather than personal gain. Clara maintained correspondence with their leader, who expressed remorse for bringing violence to Globe but gratitude for the lesson learned. Their exchange helped establish better relations between the town and its neighbors across the border. Globe's transformation continued through the changing seasons. The town's reputation shifted from a rough frontier settlement to a community known for its resilience and wisdom. Travelers passing through would hear the story of how Globe had faced down gold fever and emerged stronger, though the full truth of those events remained known only to those who had lived through them. Looking out over the town from her porch one evening, Anna realized that Ethan's real legacy hadn't been a hidden treasure, but the way his final choice had helped forge a stronger community. The letter she kept close was more valuable than any gold could have been. It was proof that one person's commitment to truth could ripple outward, touching countless lives in unexpected ways. As dawn broke over Globe, the forces converging on the small mining town created an eerie stillness. Anna Mitchell stood at her bedroom window, the Confederate cipher clutched in her trembling hands. The code, written in her late husband's precise handwriting, held the secret to millions in lost Southern gold. Below, she could see Mexican revolutionaries led by Alexander Perez taking positions in the abandoned silver mill, while federal agents under Benjamin Turner fortified the sheriff's office. The townspeople had barricaded themselves in the church, but Anna knew they were merely pawns in a greater game. Her decision to reveal the gold's location would determine not just their fate, but the future of the entire border territory. As she traced her fingers over the worn paper, memories of her husband's last words echoed in her mind. The treasure belongs to the people, not to causes or governments. Francis Roberts, the town's schoolteacher and Anna's closest confidant, appeared at her door with urgent news. "The Southern Loyalists are moving in from the east," she whispered. "Jacob Phillips is leading them, and he's brought at least 30 men. Anna's heart sank. Phillips had served with her husband, and his presence complicated everything. He believed the gold rightfully belonged to the remnants of the Confederacy. In the street below, Ethan Turner, Benjamin's younger brother, was attempting to negotiate with Alexander Perez. The two men stood in the dusty thoroughfare, weapons holstered but hands hovering near them. "This doesn't have to end in bloodshed," Ethan called out. "The war's been over for 5 years." Perez's response was cold. "This was never about your war, senor. That gold could free Mexico from tyranny." Clara Phillips, Jacob's sister and the town's doctor, had been treating the wounded from earlier skirmishes in her clinic. She caught Anna's eye from across the street and gave an almost imperceptible nod. They had discussed this moment in secret, how the gold could be used to rebuild, to heal the wounds of war rather than create new ones. But first, they had to prevent Globe from becoming a battlefield. The cipher's solution had come to Anna the previous night, a brilliant yet terrible revelation. The gold wasn't in one location but had been distributed throughout the territory, hidden in plain sight. Her husband had converted most of it into mining equipment, tools, and infrastructure. He had literally built the future of the Arizona territory with it, making it impossible to steal without destroying the very foundations of frontier society. Noah Mitchell, the town's aging banker and no relation to Anna, had unknowingly been processing the converted gold for years through legitimate business transactions. When Anna explained this to him in his office, away from prying eyes, the old man's face shifted from shock to understanding to grim determination. "So that's why Edward insisted on all those peculiar loans and investments," he mused, reaching for his ledgers. Helen Turner, Benjamin's wife and the territory's circuit judge, arrived under guard as tensions reached their peak. Her presence was no coincidence. She had the legal authority to validate Anna's revelation about the gold's true disposition. The competing factions would have to accept her ruling or risk federal intervention on a massive scale. The confrontation in Globe's Main Street had drawn every gun in the territory, but it would be resolved with papers and laws rather than bullets. As Helen Turner read the official declaration, Anna watched the faces of the men who had come to claim the gold. Anger turned to disbelief, then to bitter acceptance as they realized the truth. There was no treasure to fight over, not anymore. Alexander Perez was the first to lower his weapon, surprising everyone with a laugh that echoed off the buildings. "Your husband," he said to Anna, "he was either a genius or a madman." Jacob Phillips holstered his gun next, a complex mix of emotions playing across his weathered face. "Edward always said the South would rise again," he muttered. "Didn't realize he meant like this." The federal agents struggled the most with the revelation, their dreams of career-making seizures evaporating. But Benjamin Turner, looking at the prosperous town around him, finally nodded in understanding. The real victory wasn't in gold bars hidden in a cave, but in the foundations of civilization that Edward Mitchell had built with his secret fortune. Frances Roberts opened the schoolhouse the next morning, as she always did. But now she understood why Edward had insisted on funding it so generously, why he had established the lending library and the scholarship fund. The children who filed in were the true inheritors of the Confederate gold, though they would never know it. Alice Turner, Ethan's young daughter, asked Anna years later about the time the town was surrounded by armies. Anna smiled and told her the truth. How her husband had transformed a war chest into something far more valuable than metal. "He built dreams instead of monuments," she explained, "and those can never be stolen or destroyed." The legend of the lost Confederate gold lived on, drawing treasure hunters and adventurers to the Arizona territory for decades. But the real treasure lay in plain sight. In the schools and libraries, the mills and mines, the farms and ranches that transformed a lawless frontier into a homeland. Anna Mitchell kept her husband's cipher until the day she died, though she never revealed its contents. Some secrets, she believed, were worth keeping. Years passed, and Prescott grew from a hardscrabble frontier town into a thriving community. The children who had once studied by candlelight in Anna's makeshift schoolroom now had children of their own. Among them was Frances Mitchell, who had inherited her mother Anna's quiet strength and her father Ethan's dedication to building rather than destroying. In 1890, when the territorial governor proposed moving the capital from Prescott to Phoenix, Frances stood before the town council with her mother's weathered ledgers. She showed them how her father's investments had created a web of prosperity stretching from Globe's copper mines to Flagstaff's lumber mills. The old Confederate gold, transformed into working capital, had helped build something far more lasting than any government building. Helen Turner, now gray-haired but still sharp as ever, supported Frances's testimony with detailed accounts from the bank's early days. She described how Benjamin, before his death, had helped establish trade routes that connected their once isolated community to markets as far away as San Francisco. The paths that had once carried gold smugglers now transported grain, timber, and hope. The town archives, carefully preserved in the library Ethan had founded, revealed another layer to the story. Alexander's original survey maps, annotated in his precise hand, showed how the Confederate treasure route had later become the foundation for irrigation channels that transformed the desert into farmland. Even in death, the old surveyor continued to guide their future. Noah's grandson, a young deputy marshal, discovered a cache of his grandfather's letters in 1892. They detailed how the former Union officer had worked with Ethan to ensure the gold's transformation remained secret, protecting the town's investments from those who would have stripped the wealth away. The letters revealed a deeper truth. That redemption comes not from burying the past, but from transforming it. Clara, who had married a rancher and raised 5 children, maintained the boarding house until her death in 1895. Her final journal entry spoke of the night the army surrounded Prescott, but focused not on the tension and fear, but on the way the community had come together. "We thought we were protecting gold," she wrote, "but we were really building a future." As the 19th century drew to a close, Prescott faced new challenges. The railroad brought progress but also speculation and greed. Yet the foundation Ethan and Anna had laid proved strong enough to weather these storms. The lending library expanded into a proper school system, and the scholarship fund sent promising students as far as Harvard and Yale. Alice Turner, now a grandmother herself, often walked through the town cemetery where Ethan, Anna, and the others rested beneath simple stones. The true monument to their vision stood in the bustling streets around her, in the laughter of children leaving school, in the sound of commerce and conversation that filled the air where once only dust and desperation had blown. The cipher, passed down through generations of the Mitchell family, remained unbroken. But its real message had been written not in code, but in the lives of those who had transformed a war's bitter legacy into a community's lasting foundation. The lost Confederate gold had found its true purpose not in victory or defeat, but in the simple act of building something that would outlast all the armies and empires of history. As the new century approached, young people still sometimes came to Prescott seeking the legendary treasure. The older residents would smile and point them toward the library, the schools, the farms and businesses that had grown from those long-ago seeds. The real gold, they knew, lay not in buried chests, but in the future they had dared to build together.